Hi guys, Mr. Riley here, and today I'm in Kent, New York, and today's video is going to be about the Wappinger Confederacy. So before the arrival of Europeans, all this land was part of the Wappinger Confederacy, which was made up of a series of tribes that lived in this area approximately from Westchester to Dutchess County and on the east side of the Hudson River. So we're going to go today on a hike called Hawk Rock, and this is where the Nockpeem Tribe called home, and it was used as a hunting grounds. And we're going to go on the hike to see Hawk Rock and go find out what it would look like to native cultures. So this is an area that is protected as part of the watershed area, part of the New York City Watershed Agreement. So in order to go on this hike, you need to download a parking pass and put that in your car before you head on the hike. All right, so join me as I go search for Hawk Rock and also to narrate a little bit of the story of the Wappinger Confederacy and the Nockpeem people. So come join me. We know from local archaeology that Native Americans have lived in the Hudson Valley for over 10,000 years. As the last Ice Age glaciers receded, these first Americans lived in seasonal camps as they hunted game for meat, fur, hides, and used the bones, sinew, feathers, quills, and antlers for tools, weapons, and decorations. The Native Americans in our region were part of the Algonquin Nation, whose territory extended from the northeastern United States into Canada. These Algonquins consisted of three major confederacies: the Mohegans, Delawares, and the Wappingers. Each of these confederations consisted of several tribes. The Algonquin tribe inhabited the area around Paterson, Carmel, and Kent, and was part of the Wappinger Confederacy. The territory of the Wappingers was roughly bound on the west by the Hudson River, on the south by the area known as the Bronx, to the north by the Rhinebeck area, and on the east by the Taconic mountain range along the New York-Connecticut border. The Wappingers were made up of 7 subgroups, including the Nockpeem. Each of the subgroups was independent and handled its own affairs. The Wappingers typically only functioned as a single unit in times of war. It is believed that the Wappingers settled in the Hudson Valley in the year 1300. The bays, inlets, rivers, creeks, and coves offered natural protection from their enemies. The Wappingers' population peaked in the early 1600s when it reached approximately 8,000 people. The Wappingers were an agrarian society, although hunting and fishing also provided additional foods. The main crops included corns, beans, squash, and tobacco, which was used for ceremonial purposes. The Wappingers lived in wigwams, or wooden longhouses, but in winter they would retreat into fortified structures known as castles, which would afford them protection from elements and protection from their enemies. The footpaths made by Native Americans usually followed stream valleys. The first settlers followed these footpaths, and in the course of time, they became the roads we know as, today, Peekskill Hollow and Canopus Hollow. Native American villages were usually positioned on the side of the hill, facing south, and within easy access to water. The principal settlement in Putnam County is thought to have been in the hollows at Canopus Hill, and one of the largest villages in the entire region. Other campsites may have been located at Roaring Brook, Tompkins Corners, and Adam Corners. They fished using bone fishhooks, small harpoons, and nets made from plant materials and held down with small stone weights. They gathered freshwater and shellfish and caught small animals, birds, fish, and crayfish in snares and in hand by the wetland areas. They made canoes from dugouts and birch bark. Turtles, squirrels, and turkeys were often among their favorite catches. They made stone tools such as scrapers, hand axes, and choppers to prepare food, clean hides, and chop wood. Some of the flint they used for arrowheads and spear tips, called points, came from trade with other native people living far away. The earliest Hudson Valley people used bowls and cooking pots made of soft stone that were carved into shapes that they wanted. Later natives in the area developed clay pottery, which they fired in watertight ceramics to be decorated with rope designs and quill sketchings. The clay came from the banks of the Hudson River. Of course, Native Americans knew the use of fire and wore warm clothing made of deerskin and slept on bearskin blankets in the snowy winters. They sometimes covered their bodies in animal grease as insulation from the cold and insects. They wore moccasins in the winter and deerskin leggings to stay protected from the thorns and bushes. The women wove fine baskets and were the planters of local grasses. Most importantly, the Native Americans relied on gathering wild fruits, flowers, seeds, vegetables, berries, roots, nuts, and honey for their main diet. Gradually, by watching the cycles of nature, they learned to plant crops, and they maintained small gardens and fields filled with a variety of squash, pumpkins, beans, lima beans, and corn of all colors. Squash, beans, and corn were referred to as the Three Sisters due to their reliability and spiritual significance to the people. They grew tobacco for ceremonial purposes. Spiritually, these people were aware of the powers and the spirits of souls in all living things and considered all living beings as their relatives. They believed in a great creator who loosely controlled the natural world and the cycles of life. Native Americans such as the Wappingers created their own town-like settlements surrounded with a wooden palisade or fence. Their homes were made of wooden frames covered with bark and sometimes animal hide. Wigwams were round in the shape and often temporary, used in hunting and gathering camps. Larger longhouses were rectangle in shape and could house 40 to 60 people. Some settlements could have up to 20 longhouses and other large ceremonial buildings. Settlements near fresh water and good garden spots could remain in one place for 20 years or so, until the people moved the town to a fresher location a few miles away. 400 years later, there are few hints of the indigenous people who hunted, fished, and farmed along the land in suburban New York that we look to as our own. But places like Hawk Rock offer a tangible link to the past. By visiting and respecting this site, we can learn from the Wappinger Confederacy. The Nockpeem Tribe met their basic needs without devastating the natural environment. Today, we too can learn from the Nockpeem and find a sustainable path forward. Behind me is what people call glacial erratics, and these are boulders that were left over after the last ice age some 10 to 15,000 years ago. So these rocks have stood here for the past 10,000 years and have witnessed many changes to the land and seen many people come and go through the years. So here's another glacial erratic. This one is called Balancing Rock, and it forms a cave-like structure that again goes back thousands of years and still holding strong, so it's definitely safe. And this would be a place where the Nockpeem Tribe may have come and visited. Okay, so after we check out Balancing Rock, we know that Hawk Rock is up next. So keep going, and we're almost there to Hawk Rock.
it's easy to imagine many of the Wappingers gathering here and having campfires, and this is a sacred place for the Nockpeem Tribe and the Wappinger people. So Hawk Rock is a 25-foot glacial erratic that, as I said, was here since the last ice age. And we know that native people have lived in this area from about 10,000 years ago, according to archaeologists. So, well before the arrival of Europeans, this land had been native land, and this would have been a gathering place to meet and to have ceremonies and to socialize. And you can certainly understand why they would pick a place like this. There's giant hemlock trees all around, and it's a quiet, peaceful place that would be a perfect setting for a gathering. According to Native American legend, this place is sacred that marks a transition from one world into ours. So a portal of some sort. So I'm not telling you what to believe, but you should go definitely check it out for yourself. So if 2020 has you stressed out and a little anxious, I highly recommend take a walk in the woods and find Hawk Rock, and you'll find it very peaceful. Right now, there's no one around at all, so I have Hawk Rock all to myself, and it's a good place to ponder the past and think about what we can learn to go forward. So to get back from Hawk Rock, we're going to retrace our steps back to Balance Rock and then look for Orange Trail to take us past the Mead Farm, and that goes back to the 1860s. And as we walk back, we'll keep an eye out for some of the ruins of the Mead Farm, and also there's some stone chambers scattered about. So hopefully we'll find those too. Okay, so on the way back from Hawk Rock, we're going to take the Orange Trail, and that's the one that's going to take us past the Mead Farm. All right, so we're almost back at the parking lot, and I want to thank Patrick LaFontaine, a Boy Scout back in 2015, who came up with the idea of mapping this out and putting the trail markers there. So this trail is well marked, it's easy to follow, and even I didn't get lost, so that's pretty impressive. All right, so we're almost back to the parking lot. All right, so I made it back to the parking lot safely, and I noticed the parking lot's a little more crowded now, so get here early and you can have the place all to yourself. It took me about 2.5 hours to do the hike, but that was with a lot of stopping and taking some selfies along the way. So give yourself 2 to 3 hours for the hike and to take it all in, and get out there and explore and keep learning from the past to prepare for the future. All right, bye for now. All right guys, so the Wappinger people are now in Wisconsin, but here's a memorial to the Wappingers right here in Kent at the Putnam Veterans Memorial Park, and we have the statue of Daniel Ninham that we'll be talking about when we get to the American Revolution, but also they have a tribute to each of the Wappinger tribes that lived in this area, including the Nockpeem that lived in Kent and where we just came from with the Hawk Rock Trail. All right, so you can go check out this memorial and certainly go check out the hike. So keep living history and